Do you feel you're at a disadvantage without having a spouse by being a bachelor, which is pretty rare in U.S. politics?
Yeah, I think I'd be the first bachelor in 100 years. I think America is ready for this. If I'm qualified to lead the nation.
The world knew Lindsey Graham as a tough senator who spent decades in the spotlight. But after his sudden death, people began looking beyond the speeches and political battles. What they found was a life filled with loss, sacrifice, heartbreak, and secrets most Americans never knew. Long before he became one of the most powerful voices in Washington, tragedy had already changed the course of his life forever. And one painful moment from his early years may explain everything that happened after. Before Lindsey Graham became a senator, before the television interviews, and before the political fights, he was just a young man trying to keep his family together. And that part of his story is where everything truly begins. Lindsey Graham was born in Central, South Carolina in 1955. His parents owned a small family business where they worked long hours to support their children. Life was not perfect, but it was stable. He had a mother, a father, a younger sister, and a future that seemed normal. Then everything changed. When Lindsey was only 21 years old, his mother died after battling cancer. It was a heartbreaking loss that shook the entire family. But the pain did not stop there. Just about 15 months later, his father also died from a heart-related illness. In less than 2 years, both of his parents were gone. Imagine being just 22 years old and suddenly finding yourself responsible for someone else's future. Because that is exactly what happened. His younger sister, Darline, was only 13 years old when their father died. She was still a child. She needed someone to guide her, protect her, and help her move forward. Most young adults would have focused on their own lives. Lindsey Graham made a different choice. Instead of walking away, he stepped forward. He became the person his sister could depend on when nobody else was left. Many years later, Darline described him as more than a brother. She said he became a brother, father, and mother all at the same time. Think about that for a moment. One tragedy forced a young man to grow up almost overnight, and that responsibility would shape every major decision he made for the rest of his life. Do you think losing your parents at a young age can completely change the rest of someone's life? Let me know in the comments. The loss was painful enough. But what Lindsey Graham did next shocked many people around him and revealed a side of his character that most Americans would never see. Because he wasn't just helping his sister. He was preparing to sacrifice his own future for her. He was given a choice most people never face. Lindsey Graham could have focused on himself. Nobody would have blamed him. He had just lost both parents before the age of 23. He was trying to finish school. He was building a future. And like most young people, he had dreams of his own. But life had other plans. With his parents gone, his younger sister suddenly depended on him for almost everything. The responsibility was enormous. Bills had to be paid. Decisions had to be made. And someone had to make sure a teenage girl still had a chance at a normal life. That someone became Lindsey Graham. According to interviews given by family members over the years, he stepped into the role without hesitation. He helped raise his sister and made sure she could continue her education. Friends who knew the family said the loss brought the two siblings closer than ever. But there was a cost. Every major decision Lindsey made now had another person attached to it. Every opportunity had to be weighed against what was best for his sister. And while most people his age were planning careers, relationships, and adventures, Graham was carrying responsibilities usually placed on parents. That kind of pressure changes people. It teaches discipline. It teaches sacrifice. And sometimes it teaches people how to hide their own pains. Many who later worked with Graham noticed something unusual about him. He was intensely focused, extremely driven, rarely distracted. He often threw himself into work with a level of commitment that seemed almost impossible. Some people saw ambition, others saw something deeper. Perhaps work became a way to stay moving forward, because when tragedy arrives early in life, standing still can be the hardest thing of all. After graduating from the University of South Carolina, Graham entered military service and later built a legal career. Step by step, he started climbing toward a future few could have imagined. But even as his public success grew, one question quietly followed him everywhere. Why did the man who spent so much of his life caring for others never build a family of his own? For decades, people speculated. The questions never stopped, and the answer may have had more to do with those painful years after his parents died than most people realized. One question followed him for decades. As Lindsey Graham became more famous, people started noticing something unusual. He was always surrounded by powerful people, presidents, senators, military leaders, reporters, but there was one thing missing. A wife, children, a family of his own. Year after year, the questions continued. Political opponents talked about it. Television hosts joked about it. Reporters occasionally asked about it. Yet Graham rarely spent much time discussing his private life. Instead, he focused on work, and he worked constantly. After joining the United States Air Force Reserve and building a successful legal career, Graham entered politics. He served in the U.S. House of Representatives before eventually winning a seat in the Senate. His career was moving higher and higher, but his personal life remained mostly hidden. Over the years, Graham openly admitted that public service became the center of his life. In interviews, he often joked about being unmarried, but behind those jokes was a reality many people overlooked. Politics was not just a job for him, it was his life. Some friends suggested that the responsibilities he carried after his parents died shaped the way he viewed relationships and family. While nobody can know exactly what was in his heart, it is clear that those early tragedies left a lasting mark. For decades, he lived under intense public pressure. Every vote was analyzed, every friendship was questioned, every statement became a headline. Yet, while millions of Americans thought they knew Lindsey Graham, very few people knew what happened when the cameras disappeared. The public saw a senator. His closest friends saw something different. They described a man who could be fiercely loyal, a man who never forgot the people who stood by him, a man who often kept his deepest emotions hidden behind humor and political arguments, and that hidden side would become even more important as his career reached its highest levels. Because while Graham was building influence in Washington, he was also forming relationships that would change his reputation forever. Some made him stronger, some made him powerful, and some turned him into one of the most controversial figures in American politics. What happened next would divide public opinion like never before. The higher he climbed, the more divided people became. By the early 2000s, Lindsey Graham was no longer just a politician from South Carolina. He had become one of the most recognizable faces in Washington. His military background, sharp speaking style, and willingness to appear on television made him stand out. While many politicians avoided difficult interviews, Graham often walked straight into them. But something else was happening. The more powerful he became, the more people argued about who he really was. Some saw a principled leader. Others saw a politician willing to change with the political winds. And nowhere was that debate stronger than in his relationship with Donald Trump. In 2015, Graham was one of Trump's harshest critics during the Republican primary race. He openly challenged Trump and questioned whether he should become president. At the time, it looked like the two men would never become allies. Then something unexpected happened. Over the following years, their relationship changed dramatically. By the time Trump entered the White House, Graham had become one of his closest political supporters in the Senate. The transformation shocked both supporters and critics. People asked the same question again and again. What changed? Was it strategy? Was it loyalty to the Republican Party? Or was it something much more complicated? No matter what side people took, one thing was clear. Lindsey Graham had become one of the most influential figures in American politics. His phone calls mattered, his endorsements mattered, his opinions could shape national conversations. Yet despite all that influence, there were moments when those closest to him noticed signs of exhaustion. Years of political battles had taken their toll. The pressure never stopped. Election fights, media criticism, public scrutiny, private stress. The spotlight followed him everywhere. And while millions argued about his politics, very few people stopped to ask what carrying that burden felt like for the man himself. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe now, because the next part reveals a side of Lindsey Graham that very few people ever saw. Because behind the headlines and television appearances were friendships, rivalries, and deeply personal relationships that helped shape the person he became. And one of those relationships would eventually leave people asking questions long after the cameras stopped rolling. The public saw the fights. His friends saw something else. Politics is a strange world. One day, two people are attacking each other on television. The next day, they are sitting together behind closed doors, working toward the same goal. Lindsey Graham lived in that world for decades. To millions of Americans, he was known for political battles and sharp debates. But many people who worked closely with him described a very different side of him. They talked about loyalty, they talked about friendship, and they talked about a man who never forgot where he came from. One of the strongest examples was his friendship with Senator John McCain. The two men became close allies over many years. They traveled together, worked together, and often appeared side by side during major political events. When McCain was battling brain cancer, Graham stood by him. And when McCain passed away in 2018, Graham openly showed emotion in a way the public rarely saw. For a man known for toughness, it was a deeply personal loss. But friendships in politics are rarely simple. Some relationships made headlines for years, others sparked endless speculation. As Graham's influence grew, so did public curiosity about the people closest to him. Supporters admired his ability to build connections across different groups. Critics questioned some of those same relationships. No matter what people believed, one fact remained true. Relationships played a huge role in his success. Because in Washington, influence often comes from trust, and trust takes years to build. Yet while Lindsey Graham was helping shape major political decisions, another struggle was quietly happening behind the scenes. The pressure of public life never disappeared. Every speech was examined, every friendship was analyzed, every decision created new enemies and new critics. That kind of pressure can wear down even the strongest people. And it raises an important question. Have you ever had someone in your life who started as an enemy but later became a close friend? Tell us below, because Lindsey Graham's story may remind you of that experience. As the years passed, Graham continued moving forward, but time catches up with everyone, and eventually, attention shifted away from the political fights and toward something much more personal. People began wondering how history would remember him. And in his final days, that question became more important than ever. Sometimes a legacy is decided long before the end. No matter how powerful someone becomes, there comes a moment when people stop asking what they are doing now and start asking how they will be remembered. For Lindsey Graham, that question followed him throughout the final chapter of his public life. By then, he had spent decades in politics. He had served in Congress. He had built friendships with presidents. He had become one of the most recognized political figures in America. But public opinion about him remained deeply divided. Supporters saw a man who stayed committed to his country through military service and public office. Critics saw a politician whose positions changed over time. The debate never truly ended, and that may be exactly why his story became so fascinating. Because very few public figures create such strong reactions from both sides. As discussions about his life continued, many people began looking beyond the headlines. They started looking back at the young man from South Carolina, the young man who lost both parents before he was ready, the young man who put his sister first, the young man who carried responsibilities that most people his age could barely imagine. Suddenly, some of the pieces started fitting together. His intense work ethic, his loyalty to certain friends, his decision to remain unmarried, his ability to push through pressure that might break other people. Whether people agreed with his politics or not, those early struggles became impossible to ignore. In many ways, the tragedies of his youth never really left him. They simply followed him into every stage of his life. And as people reflected on his journey, another realization slowly emerged. The most important parts of his story were never the political arguments. They were the human moments hidden underneath them, the loss, the sacrifice, the responsibility, the resilience. Those were the things that shaped him long before America knew his name. But there is one final piece of this story that often gets overlooked, And it may be the most important lesson of all, because Lindsey Graham's legacy is not really about politics. It is about what happens when hardship arrives early and never fully lets go. The truth was never just about politics. When most people think about Lindsey Graham, they think about politics first. The speeches, the elections, the television interviews, the debates that filled news headlines for years. But when you step back and look at the full story, something else becomes clear. The most important chapters of his life happened long before he became famous. Everything seems to lead back to those painful years in South Carolina. A young man loses his mother. Then he loses his father, almost overnight. He becomes responsible for his younger sister. Many people would have been overwhelmed. Some would have given up. Lindsey Graham did not. Instead, he kept moving forward. He finished school. He joined the military. He built a career. And eventually, he reached one of the most powerful positions in American government. That does not mean every decision he made was popular. Far from it. Throughout his career, millions of Americans disagreed with him. Some strongly supported him, others strongly opposed him. But that is not what makes his story remarkable. What makes it remarkable is that the same determination that helped him survive personal tragedy also helped him survive decades in one of the toughest environments in the world. Politics changes people, pressure changes people, loss changes people. And Lindsey Graham lived through all three. When historians look back at his life, they will likely debate his political choices for years to come. But the human story underneath those choices is much harder to ignore. It is the story of responsibility, the story of sacrifice, the story of resilience, and perhaps most of all, the story of a young man who was forced to grow up far sooner than he should have. That may be the truth many people missed while focusing on the headlines. Behind the politician was a person shaped by heartbreak long before America ever knew his name. And sometimes, understanding that hidden part of the story changes the way we see everything else. But Lindsey Graham isn't the only powerful public figure whose real story stayed hidden until the very end. The next video on your screen reveals another shocking life story filled with tragedy, sacrifice, and secrets that only came to light after the cameras stopped rolling. Watch that video now, because the truth behind that story may surprise you even more.